if your company is established as a C Corp, you have up to $10 million in capital gains that are tax free. And I'm like, I wish somebody would have told me that from the beginning.
Welcome back again with Nick Anderson on the Getting the Deal Done podcast. Nick and I alternate monthly podcasts of hosting each other, and obviously this is my turn. And welcome, Nick.
Hey, John, good to see you, man.
So, one of our recent podcasts, we spent a lot of time on the subject of owner dependencies. And I got to say, you bared your soul on your owner dependency at One Accord,
Yeah.
how important you are to the business and its growth. And it's the same as I am, even though you've got a big team, I've got a small team. Uh, we're responsible for a lot of what comes in the door and how it gets done and processed and all of that. So we're going to continue on that theme today, and we're going to talk about deal killers.
Hmm.
Nick has written an article that's on the One Accord website and blog, and it's on our websites, and it's on deal killers, and he goes through some pretty good stuff in it, and little examples of people who, were facing that and wondering what the heck happened.
Yeah.
So, and coincidentally, I have a couple other podcasts that by the time this goes out, will be live on what I call silent deal killers. And so we think alike, it looks like, at least this month. So Nick started off deal killers. You approach it from the we're helping you get the company so there aren't deal killers, and
That's
we
right.
don't want deal killers when we sell it.
Yeah. Both things are true. The work that we do at One Accord is focused on serving clients to reduce owner dependency and increase the likelihood that their exit or transition, whether it's Gen 1 to Gen 2, a management buyout, or a sale to a third party that you might help them with, we're focused on helping people make that successful. And when I say both things are true, I'm also very concerned about this within One Accord. As you said, I've bore my soul open when our last conversation was focused on owner dependence. It's interesting for me, particularly in the context of a podcast recording or blog articles, to look introspectively. So I wrote that article really from the place of my own concern and fear around what might happen in the future for One Accord. Here's an example of a client, though, that we were engaged with, and this is some time ago. This is not a recent example. Let's say it's inside the last 5 years. They came to us and we did our traditional analysis. We look at the company and we identify where the risks are. And in this case, there may have been five, but one of them was key. One of those risks was key. And it was the risk that resulted in them not being able to sell when they attempted to before coming to us. So let's just frame that up. They had tried to sell the company, they were unsuccessful. They came to us. We said, yeah, this is a problem. Got to fix it. And they elected not to. Said, nope, we actually don't think that's a problem. We think we can sell. And so they went back to market and they got a buyer and they went all the way down the field to the 1 yard line and the deal fell apart in the 11th hour, whatever analogy we want to use. And it was because of that same reason again. So, as I understood, I didn't hear directly, but they implemented some of the recommendations that we had made, and it cost them another year. And then were able to successfully execute on a transaction. So, if we were to rewind that tape 5 years prior to them being successful in that exit, and they had corrected this issue, they may have been able to sell the first time or the second time, and both of those were really nice offers. The third time was really they were fatigued, they wanted out, and they took a price that that was still good, but not optimal. And as I tell that story, I tell that story not to say, yeah, we were right. I tell that story as a cautionary tale to myself that I don't want that to happen to us.
Yeah. And you are one of the few that are recognizing it from the inside because so many owners and as a sort of a little side note, I am seeing everywhere podcasts, articles, blogs, newsletters mentioning owner dependency.
Yeah,
Because if you're in this field, that what you are or what I'm doing, other than say your Main Street businesses where there has to be owner dependency because it's a job, not the job of being CEO or president, but the job of doing what the business does.
yeah,
It it is an issue and it does scare away good buyers. It can lower prices. Um, and you don't want to get caught what the example you used we don't know if we can't look back and say, did they know about this, the buyer? Did the buyer know about this? And hoping they would be able to beat the price down because of it now that they had them hooked in,
yeah.
into due diligence after the LOI and all of that. Or did they just find out it was worse than what they ever imagined?
Yep. The pendulum of understanding and where the economy is at right now, I observe the same thing you do. There is a lot of conversation encouraging younger professionals, so let's say 30s and 40s, to buy boring businesses from boomers. This is the line. Buy boring businesses and tech enable them. So go into, pick an industry, a laundromat, a car wash, a construction company, an HVAC company, a pest control company. It's been running for 20 or 30 years and tech enable it. That's great. It's great. Young professionals doing that are putting themselves in a position really of buying themselves a job for a while. Owner dependence is a necessary, it's just necessary in business for certain seasons. In that season, when an owner wants to transition the business, I have to demonstrate to whomever's going to come in to one accord that I don't need to be here. Otherwise, they're not buying the business, they're buying me. And that isn't the transaction that I want. But
Well,
there are
let me interrupt you and say
yeah,
it's or you they can easily replace you because you have a team that can do a lot of the things with the proper adult supervision.
yeah. So that's one of them. Management depth, management team depth. Uh, as you opened up, you said each of our firms respectively are highly owner dependent, which is true. And yet I've got a team of 35 today. So how is it that Nokomis, as a firm smaller than 35 and one accord at 35, and even firms that are 100 and 200 and 500 people can struggle with owner dependence?
You want a
I'm in
real
the
life example?
what's that?
Real life example?
Yeah, you got one.
500 employees.
Yeah.
The CPA firm introduced us. They recently sold to a large, we'll call it competitor, strategic buyer.
Yep.
The price was almost $100 million.
Hmm.
And the owner's transition has him working much more than he planned or expected, or even the seller thought, because he said, I was responsible for too many things others can't do. Almost $100 million deal.
Yep. Yeah, this is not about the mom and pop shop. This is a owner dependence is a real issue.
Yeah.
And yet there are at least a half a dozen. By our measure, our research indicates there are eight factors that drive enterprise value. Management team succession, breadth, depth. This is the next one up. Uh, we're actively working with a very well-run firm that is by and large not dependent on its owner today. They are exceptionally well run. And yet there still is opportunity for the management team to grow into an executive level management team that would be necessary for to open the doors to a wider array of buyers. So right now, given the structure of the organization, they're a great fit for an owner who wants to be involved. Not a great fit for a financial buyer for sure, and maybe questionable for a strategic, but in the case of a strategic, that would result in probably the loss of some jobs, which the current owner is not interested in entertaining. So there are very unique factors that come into play. You know this better than I do. The needs and desires, hopes of the owner on exit transition. Going back though to that earlier example, the deal killer in this case was supply chain risk.
Hmm.
Supply chain risk. We can look at other things like customer concentration. Might have a
Ah.
very big business, but only three key clients, as compared to a company that is a third the size, but 100 clients. And so the size of revenue maybe isn't the indicator of the value of the business. You know this, but customer concentration, particularly if the buyer starts to do some diligence and is concerned that one of those three key clients is not going to stick around, that can be a deal killer for sure.
And it's even worse if that top client or any of the top customers, clients, whatever we call them, uh, it has some of the highest margins the company's getting.
Yeah. Yeah.
The flip of that is someone we've been informally coaching till he's personally ready to sell. And he has a 22% client customer. And I pointed that out, and he says, I'm not that worried because they're our lowest margin customer. It's just we just pretty much pass things through to them, and there's not much work involved. But if we lost them, I can replace the margin very quickly. Maybe not the revenue, but the margin.
Yeah, that's smart. That's really smart.
So you got to look at it from all angles. Uh,
Yeah.
and the other thing with customers is it is contracts.
Mm,
A lot of times buyers will say, is there a contract with the customer? And very often it's not. There's the answer is no. There's not a contract. But sometimes, and that's usually not too big a deal because as long as you're taking care of them, delivering good product on time, etc. But I have seen contracts where the contract is for 3, 4, 5 years. And you say, well, wait a minute. Now you're 2 years in this 4 year contract. It's the same price for 4 years. Costs are going up. So
oops.
you've reaped the higher margin. Now it's going to be lower margin with that customer for the next 2 years.
Yeah. Interesting. Contracts on both, well, not both sides, but contracts and operational diligence is yet another area. Employment contracts and consultant contracts and agreements and vendor agreements and so
Yeah.
forth, you know, not often organized or managed well. I would just ask this question of our listeners who are owners, how many how many businesses have a vendor management program? And I think that that answer is going to be a lot lower than we'd want it to be. And if I say vendor management program and I just simplify it to this level, who has a spreadsheet with column A, all of the vendor names, column B, all of the contract renewal dates, column C, the price of those contracts, and column D, basically what's included in that?
Oh,
I think
may
if,
at column E, how much notice is take to break the contract on either
yeah,
side?
yeah, yeah, that's a pretty simple exercise. When we did this at One Accord, the so there were we only did four columns. I didn't have that advance notice column. It's a good one. We'll add it. We had four columns and I think 127 lines, 127 rows of all of the vendors and the folks that we pay for various things. That exercise in and of itself was elucidating, right? How many redundancies or what are the things that we're paying for that we don't need to, and what are we in a contractual agreement with? And my goodness, that was like I say, elucidating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, customers are, right up there with, management team, owner dependency. Uh, another one is the financials.
Hmm.
And, I know you point out in your article, I point out in my other podcast and in just about every time I talk to people about, well, how can you make sure you get less for your business? It's have bad financials.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's it's just sometimes it's just I call it small business accounting. It's sloppy.
Yep.
It's the weak little redheaded stepsister off in the corner like Cinderella, and it's a necessary evil.
So just on a real personal level, my my strategy with One Accord is that we will transition to a partnership that we'll have multiple partners, just like a law firm or CPA firm will have partners and shareholders. We want to not an employee-owned firm, but we want to create One Accord as an employee-owned firm. And I'd like to do that in 3 years, 3 calendar years. And right now we're 3 months away from the start of the year. So one of the things that I've just resigned myself to is that we will have to keep our books. We'll have to do our accounting as though we were that partnership with multiple shareholders and multiple partners 3 years from now. We need to keep the books that way today. Because if I'm going to ask partners to buy into the firm, I have to open up the books fully. And
Hmm.
I'll do that in 3 years. And I don't want to show them the small business accounting set of books that you just referred to. And I don't want to open up the books and say, well, I know we've been doing it this way for 3 years, but we're going to shift and we're going to do it, we're going to do it this way going forward. I have to be able to show them 3 years of financial statements that look like what they should expect the financial statements to look like once they become partners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I was talking with a CPA earlier today, and she was saying about a deal that fell apart, and it had to do with cash versus accrual accounting.
Mm,
And cash accounting can be real good, especially when the company's growing and you're not going to get the money in for a couple months, so you don't have to report it, especially at the end of the year. But she said the balance sheet, there's no balance there. Truly, there isn't really a balance sheet in cash accounting, that we would come to expect, like
right.
because you don't. What we all see, I often see is a modified cash basis,
Hmm.
revenue and expenses, but they still put in,
AR on the balance sheet.
AR and AP. Uh,
Yeah. They probably only put AR and no AP
yeah.
if it's modified.
Yeah. Or the other way, you never know with small business. But the
Yep.
deal fell apart because of that. And we
Yes.
have a client right now, and it's cash basis tax returns, accrual financial statements. Thank goodness for accrual statements. And the CPA has said, I can explain to anyone the difference between the two. Uh, but those cash statements can be very misleading.
Well, and it's just a shame that a great company and a great deal would fall apart because the accounting wasn't done properly. The numbers are the numbers. Now, if if somebody's fudging the numbers, then that's a totally different conversation. But the numbers are the numbers. So just start doing it right before you think you should. And then things are going to be a lot easier when they
Yeah.
need to be. That's
And
that's the
pay attention to the balance sheet.
idea. Yeah.
And I think the CPAs I know well will tell you the balance sheet's more important than the P&L. The P&L, you can manipulate that over a short period of time. Balance sheet is a history. It's hard to manipulate it.
Hmm.
And yet there
Yeah.
are a lot of people in my industry, uh, and I'm not talking investment bankers, but say a level or two below true investment bankers, don't understand the importance of the balance sheet or the working capital or how does the company have retained earnings, or is that you can tell is that seller bleeding the company from all the cash? So what's a buyer going to have to invest in because they've been just pulling cash out instead of reinvesting?
Yeah. Yeah, these are things that if we're thinking about them, as I just said, I'm 3+ years ahead of a transition to internal partners, and I know I need to start now.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I play the game a little differently than others. I think because I have the advantage of knowing, right? I know what I want to do. I'm playing with the end in mind. But I'll tell you, John, I'm scared. Like that's just the right word. I'm afraid that I'll get 3 years down the road and have missed something or done something that puts at risk this plan that I have. And if there's anything that keeps me up at night, and not much does really, uh, it is the concern that I've missed something today that I'll need in the future, and I can't go back and get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And but if you have a good accountant, controller, CFO, whatever, and whether in-house or fractional, I mean, you're a fractional model, so that would
Yep.
work. Not, it's not just taxes from the CPA, but you may need those others to make sure you're doing it the right way. You should be okay on that end. Of course, there are all
Yeah.
these other
I
things we
think
talked about.
I think I'm good on the financial statements piece. Uh, I'll tell you where I have very little confidence or security right now is in legal structure. Uh, So over the next several years, I'm going to become an expert in legal structures of business. It's not something I've had to worry about. Think about most entrepreneurs, they'll set up an LLC or get a business license to get their business going, and then at some point down the road, maybe a CPA says, "Hey, you should be an S corp. It's better for taxes." So then they convert to an S corp, and then they just continue to go, and then they attend a conference or something like I just did recently, and somebody suggests, "Oh, have you heard of the I think it's the QSBS, the
Yeah.
Qualified Small Business, and if your company is established as a C corp, you have up to $10 million in capital gains that are tax free." And I'm like, I wish somebody would have told me that from the beginning. Um, so those are the things where I'm really eager to get as much education right now, knowing that at some point in the future I want options because the data show, and you know this from real world experience, most people that want to exit their business are not able to.
Yeah, that's a statistic that gets thrown around with good reason. I hear 80, 90%. And I always add to it, 89, 80, not probably 90% of good businesses do sell.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's it. Uh, there there are obviously many businesses that transition, sell, stay alive for decades.
Yeah,
Most don't.
no. And I think as you look at the scale of businesses as they get larger, there's a greater chance that they are going to sell and transition. Uh, it's
Yeah.
all you have to do is look at the advertising sites for businesses for sale and see all the ones where people wish they weren't in business.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of those that do, how many sell for top price? How many get the best value or the best terms or the best deal? And here again, I'm not interested in selling one accord to the open market to make a bunch of money. I want to transfer ownership to partners in a way that everybody wins. And even still in doing that, I know that I'm a seller and they're a buyer.
And you're like a lot of construction companies, especially general contractors who have to bring in people like you're doing. bring them up
Mhm.
the ranks, let them buy in, and you take some of the larger ones around town that, they're on their third, fourth, fifth generation of ownership, and because it a lot of them just aren't going to sell on the open market because it's
Very,
construction.
yeah, very successful ESOPs. Uh,
Not
I
even
heard of,
ESOPs, just plants like you're talking about.
yeah, yeah, and I've heard of a very interesting C Corp structure with a wealth management firm where 85% of the shares in the C Corp are owned by employees. And there are some rules around this. It's a really cool structure. There's a number of ways to transition ownership from a founder owner to partners or internal or employee owned. And nevertheless, the folks that are buying, whether they're internal or external, they need to buy a good business, like you say.
Yeah.
90% of good businesses effectively transition. So what do we need to do to make it a good business? Well, reduce the dependence on a key person, whether it's the owner or any other key man or key person risk. Limit customer concentration to the best of our ability. And if we're overly concentrated on one client, make sure it's low margin. I like that. Look at supplier risk and vendor risk. Make sure financials are in order. What's the future pipeline look like?
Yeah.
We've made money in the past. Are we going to continue to make money into the future? And what are the opportunities for the new ownership group to do something even more or different that can be accretive to the top or bottom lines, right?
Yeah.
These are the fun conversations to have, not the, oh gosh, we found a skeleton in the closet and that's going to kill the deal.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned all the other concentrations, and you came out of banking.
I did.
Banks do that. A year and a half ago, a good bank here, uh, they like doing acquisition loans, turned down a deal. They said we won't even look at it because our bucket for that industry is full.
Yeah. Yeah, I consider it a real blessing not only to have grown up in the industry of banking, but to work for some very good bankers. Excellent, excellent bankers. Uh, and so those rules of concentration and those rules were really drafted by the FDIC, and they're good rules for good reason. But customer concentrations, I'm actually organizing one accord very similarly to the organizational design of a bank. So I just kind of I play the game the way I know how to play it.
So everyone's a vice president.
That's awesome. Yes, yes, yeah. We give out titles like candy. Um, that's a great line. What I'm doing is organizing the company to have a kind of a staff executive leadership role. So in a bank, there's a chief credit officer, there's a chief financial officer, generally a chief marketing officer, chief operations officer, chief risk officer, right? All of these functional seats that run the bank. But then we've also got a group of executive vice presidents. So the head of commercial banking, the head of private banking, the head of retail banking, the head of wealth management, so on and so forth, head of mortgage. So for the bank, you've got functional operational seats that look more like other industries, call it manufacturing, wholesaling, distributing, um, those functional seats here. But then you've got line leaders, and so I've got a very wide senior leadership team at One Accord. There's a lot of folks on there. Some of them have functional responsibility, and some of them have line and client or divisional responsibility. That's just how I know to build a professional services business. But here's the benefit in the context of our conversation here is I've got a really wide and deep senior leadership team. So if, God forbid, something happened to me tomorrow, the company will still be able to serve clients. And there are people in particular seats that can continue to run the business. And we actually do have a succession plan. So here again, God forbid, something happens to me, there is someone who can step into the role and lead the organization. Succession planning is probably low on the list if it even makes the list for most closely held businesses. Planning for what if is not a fun exercise.
No.
Uh, but given my lived experience, which I've shared a lot about openly and publicly, I don't need to necessarily go there now. Uh, one thing I know for sure is that tomorrow is not guaranteed. There is no there is no promise of tomorrow. So it's also I grew up in banking. This is the structure I know. I have a lived experience. I know that I need to plan for the unforeseen, and that all leads into succession planning, which, if I could shout it from the mountaintops, that might be something. First is going to be gross margin, and second is going to be succession planning. Those two.
So, Nick, everything we've talked about so far, I would call more tangibles. You can look at customer concentration, you can look at sloppy financials or good financials, and owner dependency. What, if the owner's doing too much. Let's move to an intangible,
Hmm.
culture.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Let me
Right in the
start it off
soul.
with an example from a past client. He hired us to help him acquire a smaller firm in his industry. He needed the capacity and the people that come with it. And the company did good work. So while we're in due diligence, he sends them a job and he says, I have to ship this to my ultimate customer on Wednesday, so I need it back from you on Tuesday. He calls on Tuesday, is the job ready? No, we'll get that get to that in the next couple of days. Well, I told you I need it today. No, well, our guys come in at 7:30 and they leave at 4. Sorry. He went and got the materials, paid people to work overtime so he could ship it out on time the next
Hmm.
day, and said, "Nope, no acquisitions. Sorry, buddy. That's not the culture we want.
Yeah.
We put customers first,
Yeah.
not getting off at 4 o'clock."
Hmm. What is it said that culture eats strategy for
Yeah,
breakfast?
who was that?
Lencioni?
Was who?
Was it Patrick Lencioni?
I don't know. I've heard it many times. I don't.
Yeah.
Was it Drucker?
One of those brilliant people.
Yeah,
Uh, I would enjoy a debate with them. I think that culture can't exist without strategy, but nevertheless, culture. Uh, I'll tell you that I think that culture is a not so silent killer of companies, not necessarily specific to the sale, the exit, but the transition of leadership. Uh, One of the reasons why the transition from Jeff Rogers, the founder of One Accord, to me as CEO beginning January 1, 2024, one of the reasons that that is a successful transition is because he and I, the founder and I, are so very well aligned in values and worldview and how we show up. Now we're very different. Jeff and I are very different, but also very well aligned. I've been through a number of acquisitions on either side working for banks. I worked for 13 banks, but I only had 6 addresses on my business card. So figure that one out in 25 years. The logo would change, but my phone number stayed the same. Just about every one could have been a Harvard Business Review study on how not to do cultural integration. And yet the announcements publicly were this is the coming together of two cultures that are very well aligned.
yeah.
Well, sure, at the board level and at the executive level, the things that are important to the board and the executives were very aligned. The
Didn't
financial
HP say
transaction.
that about Compaq?
Yeah. The the bringing together of the people at the line level, the offers, the product, the services, how clients are treated. I honestly don't know that I've seen two firms that come together that actually have matching culture. One of them is going to be dominant and is going to prevail.
Yes, definitely.
Leading through that, that takes a really special person to be able to lead two organizations through cultural integration and get to the other side with minimal collateral damage.
Yeah. So let me, two things, Nick. You come out of banking, and I'm not saying this to pick on them because I know people there and I think they're happy now, but Columbia Bank bought Umpqua Bank, kept
Yes.
the Umpqua name.
Yeah.
Now they're going back to the Columbia name.
Yep.
Uh, and, did they do, I don't know, did they do that to appease the Umpqua people to get them to take the deal? Did they do, I heard that Umpqua was a little bigger name at the time in California. But I do know what happened with some of the lending culture, and especially in the SBA loan size range, which was a disaster for a while
Oh, is that right?
because
Um,
they had two different philosophies on it,
uh,
and they tried to divvy up. This bank will run this department, this bank will run, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2,
yeah.
and and my people I know at Columbia are now back at called Columbia, are happy. But it took a while. They'll admit. I think they would admit it. The other
Uh,
thing is, you
yeah.
talked about value transition making it tougher. What about if there's a bad culture, like the example I just gave of, say a lazy culture? What does that do to the profits and value along the way?
That
Sales
I
doesn't get along with production.
yeah. Yeah.
Production doesn't, says they're giving us too much work. Well, that's our job.
Yeah, I hope the answer to that is easily discernible if we just say what happens when sales and operations don't get along. How about a more nuanced, which is I think where you're coming from, where in culture A, sales and operations are at this level, and in in culture B or in organization B, they operate at a different level, but they're operating on the same wavelength. So if we bring in a high-paced sales culture with a slow and methodical operational culture, those things aren't going to fit. Alternatively, if it's a slow and laid back sales culture, but a very sharp and focused operational culture, those things aren't going to align. And that I think that's pretty apparent, but we can hope that one will influence the other to to improve a culture. And I think that's a really risky bet. I think it's a really risky bet that
But
if
you're
we're going
right. Someone's got to
to,
recognize it.
yeah,
And often
that's
it
true.
has to be the owner because if
But
if someone if I come in and say, your culture is not very good, there's like, wait, culture's great. This is my company.
and it's I wouldn't even yeah, good and bad aren't the words that I would use. I think it's just your culture is this way and their culture is this way, that there's a difference. Because it's good enough that it's worked for that person and it's the way they want it. It's not a values question so much as it is just an accuracy. There's an old book written by some guys that walk around the desert thousands of years ago, and they use the words equally yoked, right? Equally yoked. What does that mean? It means that both parties are equipped to carry the same burden kind of in the same way. Uh, that cultural match is important without saying that one's better or worse than the other. Of course, mine's better than anybody else. I built it this way. It's just different. And here again, I've seen this through multiple transactions, either in the bank that I was working at or clients that we were serving, where there was an acquisition they bought or sold. Um, I don't know any other way to say it other than you're right. If they don't align, if the front line doesn't align with the back end, if the customer facing sales folks approach client relationships one way. I'm going to bend over backwards to customize everything that we do to make you happy. That's how the front line engages with, engages with clients. But operations is rigid and no, we don't make any changes. This is the way we are. That friction is ultimately going to result in the frontline people who are directly connected to clients. They're going to leave. Operations people are not going to leave in that situation. Now, if the front line is empowered to customize solutions for their clients and operations is being rigid, but senior management, executive management values that customized what the front end is doing, then executive management is effectively going to have to fire all the operations people and replace them with folks that are culturally aligned. Neither of those are good scenarios. Because M&A transactions are really held close to close to the vest, there's not a good way to understand before the deal gets done how these cultures are going to line up. The the buyers and the sellers are talking to one another, telling each other stories about how it is around here. Well, this is how it is around my shop. Of course, we'll do anything for a client, but they're not talking to Joe in the shop. They're not talking to Susie in accounting. They're just talking to the owner. So how do you uncover what those cultural differences are? Really, really difficult to do. Really difficult.
Well, I want to ask you a question as we get close to wrapping up here. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna ask the question, then I'm gonna give a little background based on what something you said before. So the question is, do you think knowledge helps in this situation? And you mentioned all the young people wanting to buy a business, 30 years old, even 25 years old, and
Yeah.
don't have much experience. But I don't care if it's 30, 40, 50, even 60. What I hear a lot of is I'm good at systematizing what's going on. And you think so, do you think if the knowledge that we created these systems, so every different department knows what's expected, not only from their department, but what the others, do you think that will help create a more productive culture?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
It
That
will
was
help.
that was a softball
Yeah.
question.
But there's the thing. It will help, but it's not enough. It's necessary, but it's not enough. So let's take company A and company B. Company A has very well-defined systems, very well documented. There is an SOP for everything that is done. And company B is totally loose. No SOPs,
Yeah.
right? Those SOPs help. Someone can come into a well-run, well-documented organization and have a leg up, but somebody still has to follow the SOPs. There has to be compliance with the SOPs. There has to be leadership and management. There have to be capable people there. So I say yes, but I offer a word of caution that there's an over reliance on the notion that, well, I'm really good at systems, so I'm going to establish systems and that's going to fix everything. I can be a passive owner in a business if I set up systems.
No, I would
Sorry,
remember I did say, do you think it would help? I didn't say would it be a cure-all?
for sure. I'm not challenging your position. What I am doing is leaning into what I think are some some popular notions that are going on in the conversation and saying that like yes, it's going to help, but it's not enough.
Okay. So let's have each of us give a final thought on this subject. You go first.
Systems are important, but they're not enough.
Well,
Do
I
you
mean,
like?
on the whole subject of this
I
podcast,
no
not
no
just
I
the
got
last
you,
thing.
but I do want to start there. Systems are important, but they're not enough. So one of the things that we do with clients is we help document, write the SOPs because they are important. But then you also need depth of management to enforce those systems. So we must have a, a team of people, and a team could be like two or three, or it could be 10 that can enforce those systems. And those systems should be built to reduce risk, some risks like supply chain risk or customer concentration risk. The sales systems should support a broad sales effort rather than a narrow sales effort. And those systems should also support regular strategic planning, a regular cadence of planning ahead for the future. And so here again, I'm riffing off of that systems, but picking on some of these things that I think are important.
I'm going to add your IT can kill a deal. We had a deal a few years ago that got lost. The Our client got hacked, ransomware.
Mm,
They weren't doing anything wrong. Their managed service provider got hacked and got all of the MSP's customers' login information.
mm,
And the deal collapsed and it cost the owner $500,000 because not just for the ransomware, his company dealt with sensitive information and the governments came after him and said, you got violated, you're paying, even though it wasn't your fault. Pay attention to your IT.
yeah,
So,
yep.
Nick, as always, it's been a pleasure.
Real fun, Sean. Real
And
fun. I
we
like this
will
a lot.
continue our rambling discussions next month over at with you being the host.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
Yeah, great.